Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Keeping Your Data in Power BI Up to Date the Easy Way. If you haven't already, we have a list of common questions that we'll be covering in the session. So you can pick up your copy. And if you have already a question that is on the list, rest assured it'll be answered during this session. So my name is Dima Zaid Al-Kilani. I'm from the Power BI Gateways team. And in today's session, we'll be walking you through the different ways to connect through your reports and dashboards using the gateways. We will show you the options of how to surface your on-premises data sources in Power BI. And we'll walk you through the hybrid BI architecture and help you understand how this works and how you can use it the best. And finally, best practices when scheduling on-premises refresh. So before we begin, a quick poll to see the audience. So obviously, how many of you have used Power BI before? Okay. How many of you have heard of Power BI gateways? Okay, obviously you're here. And how many actually have started using the gateways? Okay, less. So hopefully at the end of the session, you'll be excited to start using Power BI gateways, as you'll see how easy and seamless it is to either use the enterprise gateway or the personal gateway to keep your on-premises data sources up to date. So Power BI, as all of you know, is a way where you can keep your data insights and visualization for your dashboards to understand how you're doing, whether it's on the service or on your mobile, and always have your data insights at your fingertips. But the importance of a dashboard and how valuable the data is on the dashboard is, it matters how fresh is your data. If you have data on your dashboard that is not up to date and a few days old, it's not as valuable, as powerful of a dashboard it is if it was coming live from your data sources. So when you want to understand the data refresh for Power BI, there are three questions. We like to think of them as three different buckets of what you should be doing to keep it up to date. The first one is, where is your data? Is it on cloud or is it on premises? As you know, in Power BI, we support a huge variety of data sources on the cloud, whether it's you're accessing the data through direct query for Azure SQL, Spark, HD Insights, or you want to import the data and set scheduled refresh, you can do that today with Power BI. And to learn more about the list of the cloud sources, you can look into documentation, but it's a large set of variety, and it's very easy to start using. The other bucket of where your data could be is on-premises. What we support from data on-premises is also a long list of data sources like SQL Server, Analysis Services, Oracle, DB2, and a lot more data sources. And you can either use direct query or scheduled refresh to keep your data up to date. We also support if you have any files or folders or SharePoint on-prem. Now that you've decided where is your data, you gotta know how do you want to connect to that data. Do you want to go with the import data and have scheduled refresh, or set up a direct query or a live connection in Analysis Services and keep it up to date, refreshing from your data sources? Or you could use one of the Power BI REST APIs to get data from your data sources. So to go briefly over the two types of how you can use and refresh data in Power BI. As I mentioned, there are two ways. The first one is if you want to import your data to the Power BI service from your on-premises sources. The first one is, we're going to look at them depending on your scenario. You can choose to go with the import scenario or the direct query. For the import, you'll have to set up a scheduled refresh to make sure it's up to date. It could be hourly or daily. We provide up to 8 times a day. The second thing is performance. There's no noticeable delay as the data is imported into Power BI and is refreshed right from there. So there will be no regression at all. The data storage, as I mentioned, it's cached mode, so it's stored in the cloud. So you'll have to be okay with moving your data into the cloud, knowing that the performance would be as high as it could be. And the data size, the current limitation we have is 250 megabytes compressed per model. And finally, row level security, you will not get the same row-level security on your on-premise sources, but as we announced yesterday, you can set up the row-level security on the data set in Power BI. So different people can see different views of your data set, but it's not the same as what you have in your data source. The different type of connection is the direct query, or in analysis services, it's called a live connection. So the refresh frequency, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to be live, getting data as it's changing in your data source. But the performance here will depend on your connection, on how your data source will be able to transmit data to Power BI. So here, another difference between the import and direct query, if you want your data not to be cached in Power BI, you will have to compromise and have it based on the performance of your data source. There's no data stored in Power BI. It's always on premises. You don't have to move it, except there's a disclaimer here is some data will be cached to optimize your dashboard views. And finally, data size on-premises data is the limit. There's no limit constraint from the Power BI side. And you can reuse the on-prem role-based security for analysis services that you have set up on your data source, so you don't have to worry about doing it again on Power BI. So now we've covered that you know where your data is coming from. In this session, obviously, we're going to be focusing on the on-premise data sources. And then you've decided how to connect your data. Now the question is, how can I keep my data up to date without having to move it from my on-premises location to the cloud? So the supported on-prem ways that Power BI supports is the personal gateway, the enterprise gateway, and the AS connector. I'm going to pause here to ask another question, is how many of you are still using the AS connector? Oh, okay, good news. Good news for us, but not for you, that the AS connector, we will stop supporting the AS connector as of March 31st, which is about a week from now. We have provided you with great guidance of how you can go to the enterprise gateway. We have the same supportability with the gateway scenario, and it's very seamless to upgrade. All you have to do is install the enterprise gateway, make sure that the analysis services databases are connected through the enterprise gateway. You have added the people who need to see and use that gateway, and we'll see how to do that in a bit. And finally, add the users who can publish the reports, and you can uninstall the AS connector for good and start using the enterprise gateway. So again, we're ending support March 31st, so please upgrade to the enterprise gateway. We moved too fast. That's good, right? So now we'll go to the first gateway flavor, which is the Power BI, the personal gateway. Think about the gateway as its proxy or a bridge that would sit behind your firewall and will make sure to transmit your data from your data sources into Power BI service. And you don't have to move your data anywhere to the cloud. You don't have to set up different hoops. It's just you install the Power BI gateway, and it will take care of transmitting your data from the on-premises sources to the cloud. The personal gateway, as the name implies, it's personal. There's no centralized management. You set up the personal gateway, and it will be used just for you. That said, if I set up the personal gateway and I would like to share the dashboard with different people, they can see the data, but it will be going through my personal gateway. So if, let's say, Siva wants to publish a report using the same data source, he will have to set up another personal gateway to serve him for that purpose. But as we will see in the enterprise gateway side, that's the main difference. It's more of an centralized solution. So it can run either as a service or in an app based on the user controls on that machine. So we'll be going into a demo, a quick demo for how to use the personal gateway. So to limit the personal gateway, you mean as an admin? I'm just going to repeat the question. As an admin, limit the people who can install the personal gateway on their machine? The answer is not currently, but we're looking into those scenarios as giving the admin of the tenant, for example, the ability to say either no one can install a personal gateway or only these people can. We're having some technicality. We'll give it a few seconds. If it's not working, we'll proceed with the slides and then do the demo once. How about we do that? So I'll do the personal gateway and the enterprise gateway demo after we talk about each, and then we'll recap again. So the enterprise gateway, as I briefly mentioned, it will give you a way to centralize view. It will give you a way to control who can access the gateway, and it will also give you the ability to share that control of the gateway with other people. So if I set up an enterprise gateway, I can add Siva as someone who can use that gateway, and once he wants to publish a report using a data source, he can take advantage of my enterprise gateway and publish using it. And from my view, I can always see who are the people who are using the gateway and if I want to give access to more people. Another level of control would be administrator. I can add more admins to my gateway and give them the ability to add different data sources to that gateway. So, yeah, we'll be quick. Connecting again, I lost the VPN. Okay, it's connected. Okay, sorry about that. Now we're going to move to the demo and show you the personal gateway in action as well as the enterprise gateway. Okay. Okay. It's refusing to duplicate. Sorry about that. Okay. So what I have here is Power BI Desktop. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with it. And in Power BI Desktop, I have set up a connection and a dashboard to my SQL server that is on-premise. And the way I chose the connection here is scheduled refresh. So I will be importing my data from the SQL server into the Power BI Desktop once I do a publish. So once I publish to Power BI, it will not complain that I have an on-premise connection, as you will see in a bit when we do the direct query. If I had a direct query in my connection, it will complain and say, we've published your dashboard, but you're trying to set up a live connection, which is not supported without a gateway. So here, it was supported because it's an imported. It just imported the data to my dashboard. So here in my dashboard, you can see the same dashboard, but now in the Power BI service. But if I want to go and say scheduled refresh, it will not allow me, and it will look for a gateway since this is an on-premise connection, but it will not allow me to do it since I don't have that. Right here, you can go to scheduled refresh from your data set. And if I attempt to try and use my personal gateway, it's saying it's offline, so I need to go and configure one, which is what we will be doing right now. So just to give you the pointer of where you can download the gateways, if you can go to, from Power BI, you can go to Power BI Gateways, and it will take you to the link of where you can find both the enterprise and the personal gateway, and a small explanation of the difference between both. So you can download it from here, and it will be the latest version every time. So going back to my personal gateway installation, it's very simple, but it will remind me here that in order to keep my dashboard up to date, the gateway will have to always be online, and the machine always have to be running and connected to the internet. If my machine is not connected for some reason, or I put it on the laptop and it turns off, my dashboard will not be able to have a successful refresh. So accept the terms. While it's installing, what it's doing is it's associating my Power BI ID with a gateway. So I can use it in different places. I don't have to configure it per data source, and I will find it every time I need to set up a scheduled refresh with an on-premise data source. And I'm calling this out because in a bit you will see how in the enterprise gateway, it's a little different, where there's a place where you can go to manage that gateway, add data sources to it, and then consume it accordingly. While it's finishing, once it's done, it will ask me to sign in to Power BI, and then if I go to my scheduled refresh, I will find it here and use that gateway to use it. And as I mentioned, if now I have a report and I publish it to a dashboard, sharing that dashboard with another coworker will not mean that they need to have access to the gateway, but they will be using my credentials to connect to that data source. But they will be able to use that dashboard. And it's my responsibility then to keep the gateway always online and connected. Okay, now we're done with the installation for the Power BI Gateway, the personal. And the last thing I'll have to do is sign in so it could associate me to that gateway without, so because there's only one gateway per person, it didn't ask me to give a name for that gateway because I have no choice if I'm using the personal gateway. It's a one-to-one relationship between me and the personal gateway. Where in the enterprise gateway, it will ask me for a name because I can have unlimited number of gateways running under me, and I can share it with different people. So as it's going, we can go start the next demo, which is with the enterprise gateway. I keep pointing to the enterprise gateway differences, so maybe it's time we can show it in action. Okay. So it's up and running. So if I go again to my dashboard, to my data set, I can now see the gateway connection as online, and I can use that to set up a scheduled refresh with my data set. And then from here, as I mentioned, I can set up how many times, if I update the credentials, I can set up how many times I want it to refresh. And currently, the limitation is 8 times a day. You can decide when exactly you want it, from an hour or a minute. And we've heard feedback that sometimes 8 times a day might not be sufficient, especially if it's a really small data you're trying to refresh. So we'll be looking into changing this and being more understandable of how long is your refresh, and decide and design accordingly. So jumping to the next demo, which is the personal gateway, the enterprise gateway. So what I have here, it looks the same, but the only difference is you can tell from here. I've set up direct query enabled for this connection. So if I now attempt to publish it, it will complain and say, you have a direct query setup, so you cannot move your data to the cloud unless if you have a gateway configured. Oh, okay. Okay. Looks like while preparing for the demo, I forgot to delete one of the gateways. So let's do that. And remove. And we'll come back to this UI in a bit too. Okay, let's do it again now to show what the expected experience would be. Okay. That's what's expected. So what's telling me here now is I don't have a gateway set up yet, an enterprise gateway. So it's telling me that we were able to publish your data set and report, but we will not be able to show any data there because you don't have a gateway configured for that data source. And if I click on the link to go and see my report, what I would see is basically a dashboard with tiles, but I don't have any data in it. Which is pretty frustrating after it's someone who went to Power BI desktop and configured everything and made sure it's working in the desktop. And once you try to move it to your the Power BI service, this is what you would see if you don't have a gateway. So luckily, you're here now, so you would know how to fix it. So what I would do here is you can click on Learn More, which will tell you more about the Enterprise Gateway. I've installed it in advance, and I have the latest version, which we shipped at the beginning of March. And I'll be calling out the differences between the enterprise and the personal gateway. And I'm going to start with the first difference is the personal gateway does not support direct query or live connection. So it only supports scheduled refresh and the import mode. The personal gateway, you cannot set up a direct query with it. So if you're trying to enable this scenario with a personal gateway, it will not work. So the enterprise gateway does support 4 different data sources with a live connection or a direct query. We support SQL Server, analysis services, Teradata, and Oracle DB. So it's giving me the same notification that this needs to be always online to be able to use it. And now it's installing the gateway. So another difference with the enterprise gateway is because we've designed it for the enterprise usage, is we have what we call is a recovery key. A recovery key will enable you if for some reason you want to take over the gateway and install it on a different machine, or someone has left the team and you want to restore the gateway and have it on a different machine. We have the recovery key that will enable you to configure an option that says configure from an existing gateway. And once you have the recovery key, which is an 8-character key, you can, we will restore all the list of data sources you have, as well as the credentials associated with those data sources. So you don't have to worry about configuring it again and again on different machines. If a machine for some reason goes down, using the recovery key, you can take over and migrate all the data sources as well as the credentials to that new gateway. So we'll give it a name. Say it's for marketing. We'll give it the 8-character recovery key. So now what I have is an enterprise gateway associated with my account, but I had to give it a name because, as I mentioned, the difference with the personal gateway is I can have as many enterprise gateways as needed. So yes, if you create the gateway, you will be the person administrating that gateway. But that said, you can add more people to be admins on that gateway. So if I create a gateway and add Siva to the list of administrators, he would be able to see that gateway, add data sources, and add users to those data sources as well. So here comes another difference, which is the centralized view. So it's no longer under the control of one user. It can be under the control of multiple users, and they can make sure to have it online all the time and add people as needed. So I'm going to add a data source, which you didn't have to do in the personal gateway because it just appears on every data source that you might need. Venture works. I will select as a SQL server, and I will go and get the name of my server. As well as the database name. Sorry? Is it creating an ODBC connection with the gateway data source? So what the credentials that I'm entering here will be used on the gateway. It will be encrypted in the cloud and only decrypted on the gateway to set up the connection with the data source. And it will run the query as needed if I need to refresh my database or dashboard. And here we have the option, I can go with the Windows authentication method or the basic and enter my credentials. Now there's another users tab or users list, which is different than the administrator. This means that if I give, let's say, Siva access to this data source, it means if he wants to publish a report that is connected to this data source, I'm giving him access to use my gateway to do that. I'm not making him an admin on the gateway, so he cannot add data sources as needed. I'm only giving him access to use this data source using my gateway. So the authentication will be using my authentication and my credentials to access the data source.
That's not true if you're connecting to analysis.
Yes. In analysis services, it's different as we pass the username as the effective username and try to connect with the data source. So it might be different. Yes. So currently, if you're using, the question is with SQL 2016, since it's now supporting RLS, will this be different? As of today, the answer is no, but we're looking into supporting RLS and honoring basically RLS from the users, the gateway connection to the data source.
Can I add groups rather than individual users?
Yes, thank you for pointing this out. You can also add security groups and to your list of users here and to the list of admins. So instead of adding individual user, maybe having to add a 10 or 100 user, you can just add a security group right here, and we'll take care of checking if this user is part of that security group and give them access accordingly.
That's coming from the AE?
Yes. It's coming from, the question was that coming from AAD? The answer is yes. So if we go back to my previous dashboard, now if I attempt to refresh, it will detect that I have a gateway associated with this data source, and it will start showing the data. And with a live query, if the data changes on the data source, it will be reflected here. As long as I have my gateway up to online and running, it will be the data will be showing up here. And if I build a dashboard on top of the report, and share the dashboard with as many people as I want, it will always show the data as a live connection in analysis services or a direct query in any other data sources. So we'll switch back to the slides. We only have a few more slides, and then we can talk about the architecture and also best practices in using the gateway. So as we mentioned, the enterprise gateway, the main difference is it's centralized. So one user can control who is the admin and who gets to use that data source. Another difference is one of the features, as I mentioned, is in the personal gateway, you can use scheduled refresh, but with the enterprise gateway, you also get to choose direct query in the 4 different data sources, as I mentioned, and we're adding more and more data sources to that list. One more difference with the enterprise gateway is if you go to perf monitor on the machine that is running the gateway, you can see the list of counters and have a view into how your gateway is performing. Something you wouldn't have in the personal gateway, but with the enterprise gateway, we now give you the view to understand how your gateway is performing and whether you need to add a different gateway for a different connection or not. The question is, what controls whether the enterprise gateway online or offline?
Right, so first of all, you have to have this
Yes. It's the same. Enterprise gateway and the personal gateway, you always have to have the computer up and running and connected to the internet for it to be able to serve the dashboard or the reports it's associated to.
So whatever machine the enterprise gateway is installed on.
Yes, it needs to be up and running all the time for you to take advantage of it. And as I mentioned, if for some reason the machine goes offline and you have no control over that, using the recovery key, you can set up quickly an enterprise gateway again and configure from an existing, put the recovery key, and you're back up and running, and hopefully no one would notice it from the dashboard user's side.
For the enterprise gateways, the personal one can run as a service or an app. Does the enterprise gateway have the same flexibility, or is it only run as a service?
It only runs as a service. You have to be an administrator on that machine to be able to run the enterprise gateway.
If the machine's on and the service is not running,
If the machine is online, what service? Yeah, which is not something in your control in that case. And hopefully we were able to get it back running. But yes, it'll have to be both the machine and the service up and running. And with the error messages, it's always easy to differentiate what is going on and fix it if it's your machine.
in your previous slide, it says that actually the one before for the enterprise gateway, it says schedule refresh coming soon. So it's schedule refresh. No, back to
Yep.
On the enterprise.
On the enterprise one?
It says schedule.
Oh, sorry. It's a bug in the slide. Scheduled refresh, we supported it last month. So you can use scheduled refresh for all your data sources. So now we're going to talk about the architecture. How does the gateway work and how does it connect to your data securely? So first, the gateway is installed and configured and, of course, online. And during configuration, we set up a service bus to be associated with that gateway. So when you enter your credential to the data source, in Power BI, we store it encrypted in the cloud, and the only way to have it decrypted is on the gateway machine itself. So we don't know what your password is, what your credentials on the cloud. Only when you kick off a refresh or you open the dashboard, that's when we decrypt it on the gateway machine, and the gateway will send the data source, will send a query to the data source. So Power BI kicks off a refresh, which means someone is looking at the dashboard in the case of a direct query, or a scheduled refresh is about to happen. So our data movement service analyzes the query and pushes to the appropriate service bus, which means according to which user have which gateway configured which data set. And finally, the gateway pulls the bus for pending request. Once it gets the request, it sends the query, decrypts the credential, sends the query to the data source, gets back the executed query, executed results, pushes back through the service bus and back to the Power BI service. So just to summarize the enterprise gateway features, we GA'd about 2 months ago, and the features supported is direct query for 4 different data sources, and hopefully we're going to expand it to all supported data sources. The other one is we're supporting scheduled refresh as of last month, live connection to analysis services models, both tabular and MD. So we have the parity with analysis connector. Monitor gateway and data sources perf counters. As I mentioned, if you are an admin on the machine that is where the gateway is running, you can see the counters and you can decide whether you want to scale up or down for that gateway and whether you want to move different data sources to run on different gateway on a different machine. And restore or migrate or take over the gateway. If for some reason the machine is offline, you can, using the recovery key, have a new gateway servicing the same list of data sources. And coming soon, we will be supporting additional data sources. If you're using the personal gateway, you will notice that we still don't have the same list of supported data sources between personal gateway and enterprise gateway. We're working on it. We'll be supporting, and hopefully we'll get a parity of supported data sources between both. So deciding whether to go between personal and enterprise will be based on your needs and not the supported data sources, hopefully. And finally, richer troubleshooting and supportability. So finally, what are the tips and best practices for using the gateway? The first one is, just like any Power BI product, we have monthly updates. So once an update is out, please get the latest update. And if you install the update, we will take care of moving you to the latest update without having to reconfigure or uninstall the previous gateway. The second one is keep it always on, always online, and credentials have to be up to date running that gateway. The next one is what are the outbound ports to be opened on the gateway computer? The list is port number 443, and then the range of 9350 to 9353. And we asked for a range because this will depend on which service bus is servicing your gateway. So we can't give you a specific port to open in that case. It can be either on a server or a client OS, as long as it's up and running and can handle your queries and data sources. We don't have a preference. The next one is it cannot be installed on the same machine as your local domain controller. We've seen some issues with customer where they install the enterprise gateway, the same machine with a local domain controller. So the enterprise gateway will not be able to perform correctly. So we ask you not to install them on the same machine. And finally, installing multiple gateways on the same computer is something you can do, whether with an enterprise gateway side by side with a personal gateway or side by side with a different enterprise gateway. So you can do that as long as you keep an eye on the perf counters and make sure the gateway is running, is performant and running and servicing your queries without adding any regression. And finally, one more thing that is not here. We get a lot of questions on where to install the gateway, what is the recommended settings. So a recommended setting would be start with an 8-core machine and then look at your perf counter. If you feel like it's not being used as much, you can scale down, and using recovery key, you can move your gateway there. Or if you feel you need to scale up because you're using direct query or import, you will have to scale up and use a different machine. So there's no right answer there. It always depends on both how many data sources you've configured and how are you configuring those data sources. Whether it's a direct query or an import case, it makes a lot of difference on how much the gateway can handle.
Did I read somewhere that the analysis services gateway is like being
Deprecated?
yeah.
Yes, the analysis services connector or is being deprecated. We're ending support for it end of this month. So if you haven't already, please move to the enterprise gateway. It should be very easy and seamless to do so. So this is the list of questions you already have a copy for. We can go through them quickly. Can I install personal gateway, enterprise gateway on the same machine? The answer is yes, you can do that. As long as both are performing correctly, it's easier to keep them online. Can I install the enterprise gateway and domain control on the same machine? The answer is no. Please move it to a different machine to have the gateway running correctly. And then what are the port numbers to be open? As we mentioned, it's 443, you have to open it, and then a set of range of ports, and depending on which service bus, which we don't know in advance. Can I have specific IPs to open? No. It will, again, depend on which service bus we'll be using. Does Enterprise Gateway have support for high availability? Today, we do not have support for high availability. We're looking into adding this as to the Enterprise Gateway in the near future, but today we do not have support for high availability. Number 6, where should I install Gateway for optimal performance? As I mentioned, it depends on your usage. It depends on the data sources that you're using, but keep an eye on perf counters, and that will be the only answer we would go with. But you can start with an 8 gigs core machine and scale up or down depending on your needs. You can install it on the same machine as long as it's going to be online. And the only limitation is not to have a local domain controller. Seva has most knowledge in the analysis services world. So the question was, is it okay to put the enterprise gateway with the analysis services? Would that have any impact on performance?
Yeah, so it's okay to put it on the same machine. You need to monitor how much resources they consume. Especially if you're having an enterprise gateway, you want to manage the servers, then you might want to consider a different machine. It might be okay with starting with initially, monitor what is the usage in terms of overall resources from the enterprise gateway, and then appropriately you can plan for it, right? Whether it's moving it to a different machine overall.
Thank you. Number 7, do I need a pro license to use gateways? The answer is yes. The freemium user cannot be using either the personal or the enterprise gateway. You will need a pro license to use both. And the next one is, where's the best place to install the gateways from a geographical point of view? So our guidance is to always keep the 3 points next to each other. And what I mean by 3 is the Power BI service cluster you're using. And if you're wondering how do you know that, is if you go to powerbiservice.com, on the top right of the screen, there's a button that says About Power BI. From there, you can know which cluster you're on. And then the gateway needs to be as close to this. And finally, considering where these are, your data source, it also have to be, the 3 of them have to be next to each other. So whether it's more possible to move your gateway next to your data source or move the gateway next to your cluster, it's up to you. But our guidance is always to try and keep them, for best performance, try and keep them closest to each other. Do I need a gateway for SQL, Azure, or other cloud sources for refreshes or direct query? The answer is no, you do not need an enterprise gateway if your data sources is in the cloud. The only place and time you need an enterprise gateway is if it was running on on-premises machine. How do I monitor or use perf counters? You can go to perf monitor in your machine that is running a gateway, and there you can easily find Microsoft Enterprise Gateway and get the counters from there. We do not have documentation on this, but we'll be adding it really soon to help you understand what's good and what's bad. What information is in the log file? If you've had problems with the gateway and contacted our team, we always ask you to send us the log file for your enterprise gateway. This is in our documentation, but if you look at it, it will provide you a lot of more information on what's going on and why is the refresh not happening, and it will show a lot of information regarding how the gateway is performing. How do I troubleshoot a refresh or direct query issues? The log file is the single source of truth. You would go there and take a look. It might be a credentials problem, or it might be a problem accessing the data source. So make sure to look at the log file. Again, the link, you can find it in the gateway documentation, and you can understand what's going on from there. And finally, the last question is, does Power BI support scale out or load balancing? On its own, Power BI Gateway does not support that today, but if you're using a front-end load balancer, the gateway, we're in progress of testing whether the gateway will work with this. And once we figure this out, hopefully soon, I know Siva is working on this, we will update our documentation to guide you on how to use it. And that's all what we have. Finally, if you have any questions after this session, you can send it to hybridbi@microsoft.com or to my alias, which is dimazaid@microsoft.com. And we'll be taking questions for the next few minutes. Thank you. First question.
So since you're deprecating the AS connector, you have that
Yep.
allows you to pick plan. When is that going to be available?
The get data, you mean? The get data experiences in the service. Yes, we've already are showing an info bar that is saying will be the enterprise gateway analysis services configured sources will be showing in that list soon, a few days after we're deprecating the AS connector. So you will have this experience if you're using the enterprise gateway.
So it's a timing thing for us. We didn't know, we have a both, and right now we have our test server going through the gateway and our production server through the AS, and we didn't know what timing
Yes.
because we have, our colleagues are using the Git experience in the service.
Yep.
So what should we do?
So we're ending support for the analysis services on 3/31st. So if you're still using it a few days after that, it's okay. It will still work, but we'll not be supporting it. But for the get data services, only a few days after March 31st, it will be there. So it might be a gap of a few days. So
So there could be a gap.
a really small gap. We're already almost done with the work and pushing it.
Is there a way I can initiate a direct query connection to a database without the Power BI desktop?
The question is if you're able to initiate a direct query without the Power BI desktop.
Yeah, so still using the gateway, but not initiating it from the desktop Power BI. Does that make sense?
Yes, so from Power BI service, from the get data experiences, I don't think it's supported, but Siva could confirm.
So what we recommend with respect to direct query is primarily from a report authoring experience, use the Power BI desktop. You can directly connect to your source in terms of direct query mode. We support SQL, SQLizer, SAP HANA, Teradata, etc. Once you've authored this, then upload it to the service. That's when you need the enterprise gateway for the service to work directly against it, right? Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of like what you mean by I don't need the desktop?
Maybe in an instance where you want to install the desktop on a server for whatever reason, is there a way to constantly update the tables in your database to Power BI online?
So as and when you update, so they install the Power BI desktop on a machine, right? After that, as and when if the data changes in the backend, wherever the data changes, if you refresh the visuals in the Power BI desktop, then you should see the latest data because it sends direct query against the source. So the answer.
Yeah, so if you do it only once from the desktop using direct query, it will always update the latest changes happening in your database, and you don't have to do it again.
Yeah, even any operation like highlight, cross filter, filter, all of this, it will send the queries back to the backend.
Yeah.
I also have quite a few reports what ends up happening is I get this reload what is like what is an experience or something you guys suggest would be to, once I build this report, hand it off and make sure that that later refresh experience is still taking place, but it doesn't stay within like my workspace, my 50 whatever's going on. What is something you guys recommend?
So the question is, if you have multiple reports running, you just want a better way to control them, either in grouping and have the refresh go across them all.
Yeah. Is that perhaps maybe an instance where I would use an enterprise gateway versus continuing
Would it be the same data source across all the reports? So using the enterprise gateway or the personal gateway, it would be sufficient to keep any report that is using the same data source. So it doesn't matter what report is using it. the gateway only understands data source connection. So if you're using the same data source across 10 different reports, one gateway should be sufficient to handle. And then it's up to you if you want to be the only one controlling and publishing the reports using that gateway. You can use personal gateway, but if you want to give other people access to publish reports using that data source in your gateway, they don't have to worry about it. You can use the enterprise gateway. Yep.
So, if the user started with a personal gateway, and then, we decided that's something we're going to share across, can we then, when he brings it to IT, can we switch to the enterprise and won't break anything, or it would need to rebuild it?
You will have to set up an enterprise gateway and then scope down what are the data sources that are being used. And from managed gateways, you go to the UI and say, add the list of data sources, and that should take care of keeping the reports you are using up to date. But in case, but in case of scheduled refresh, you will, one final step would be to choose the enterprise gateway over the personal gateway. As I showed in the UI, you will, if you have both running, servicing the same data source, you can choose, and both have to be online, of course. You can choose which one to use. So in that case, you would have to, one, scope the list, two, go to managed gateways, add the list and credentials, and finally switch to the enterprise gateway in the case of scheduled refresh.
That would be in the desktop, right? Power BI desktop would be the place to go for that.
No, it will be on the Power BI service. If you go to the top right, there's the settings gear. If you click on it, click on Manage Gateways, it will take you there where you can manage the different data sources for your gateway. Yep.
So I did some training, and this may be out of date, but if we had content in Excel that calculated, and you save that file to OneDrive, which is then content to the dashboard, I thought they said that would somehow refresh Power BI, but I'm thinking that that's not the case.
Was it business OneDrive or is it personal OneDrive? So it's on premise, it's not on the cloud.
It's in the cloud, so you save your Excel file, let's say for some content in business OneDrive, and that content has been imported into Power BI dashboard and report. But I think the only way the refresh works is through this scheduled report.
Yes, you mean versus direct query?
Yeah.
Yeah, direct query, as I mentioned, only supports 4 data sources, SQL, AS, Oracle, and Teradata. So we'll be adding more support going forward, but currently you cannot do it. But if your data source that Excel is reading from is SQL Server, you can connect directly to the SQL Server or to an AS without having to go through Excel. That way you can guarantee that you can get live connection.
So just to add one more point, if it's an Excel workbook where you have a data model and you're pulling data, is that your question? Yeah, so that one case, if you publish it to your OneDrive and then bring in the Excel file into Power BI, you can go into the settings page, and then you can, under workbooks, you can set up the refresh using the personal gateway or enterprise gateway. You can choose and set up the refresh there even for Excel workbooks, right?
Yep. The encryption level of the gateway on the gateway itself.
So can you elaborate when you say level? So right now, so it's currently using HTTPS to connect on-prem, but like if you're going from cloud to on-prem, it's using service bus relay in terms of posting the request and everything. So whatever the encryption mechanism in terms of that's already secure. So it essentially boils down to the service bus relay and the encryption mechanism used there. We just follow using that one.
Yeah, but we can follow up.
We can follow up and then
your-
get the information to you.
Yeah, we can get the information. Yep.
Is there any way, or is it coming, to switch from import to direct query without redoing?
today, the only way to do it is going back to the desktop and going to data source settings. You can switch from import to direct query. So,
There's an option to switch now.
sorry,
There's an option to switch now.
in desktop, you will have to publish it again.
Right.
So there's no magical button on the service to switch unless Steven knows of it.
No, check. I think there is an option, but I don't know whether that automatically redoes everything because it's a little bit complicated thing. Go if it just go and check on the desktop. If it's not available, go and make a feature request on ids.powerbi.com. Okay.
Is that a question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get back to what this fellow was asking a minute ago about the development environment. We're gonna have people developing on the desktop product, and they'll be using a local instance of SQL Server on the development machine.
Mhm.
So there's really no gateway involved in the development process.
Yep.
You can go directly with that. But you do name the data, the server name that you're using locally on the machine, and the database name are there. Publish that PBIX up to the service, and I set up the enterprise gateway. If the name of the server is obviously going to be different than it was locally, is the enterprise gateway going to be able to manage that?
So the question is, I have a
A different server name when you publish it. If locally it was developed with, Jeff on the
So at the time of publishing in the so you're authoring the reports in a local development environment, and then when you're publishing it, you are essentially using going to be like a production environment, and you need to point to production SQL Server. Yeah. So typically, what I recommend most of the customers whom I'm working with enterprise customers, so they have like a development environment, development server, and then like a production server and production environment. And this being used even within Microsoft's various teams as well. So they do develop using the development environment. If they have a production environment, they need to change this using in the Power BI desktop. They can change the source in terms of the edit setting, where you will switch from development environment to the production environment, and then you need to save and then republish it. There's no way to automatically change the connection string.
Okay, wait, you were talking real fast.
Okay, sorry.
You're saying on their development machine, they need to change.
In the Power BI desktop, right? In the Power BI desktop, they can go to the edit setting, and in terms of the source, you're connecting to a local SQL server, right? SQL Server 1, and you prepared all of the reports and everything, right? And you prepared all of the reports. You can actually change the server name from SQL Server 1 to the SQL Server production, right? SQL Server development.
Even though SQL Server production doesn't even exist in your local environment, you're just changing it.
You're just changing.
You change the name, and then you have to, then you publish it.
Correct.
To the service, and then your gateway is going to be set up to reference that service. So that's how it's going to.
That's how it's going to go. Yeah.
Yep.
So when you say sell it, are you looking at like so you're preparing a dashboard overall, and you're using a direct query mode connecting to a SQL Azure as an example, right? Now, can you elaborate what do you mean by selling? Are you preparing a dashboard and then sharing this to multiple users? How? Okay, so if you have a backend source and a lot of customers using it, and if you need to packages, currently what we currently have is what you're mentioning as a SaaS, where the data is pulled into the service, and then it's periodically kept up to date in terms of refreshing. That's the method which we have. We don't. We are looking into direct query options, but like something down the road in terms of go and create a request on ids.powerbi.com on this one. It's mostly because a couple of reasons. One is like these are various sources, and people might have only limited permissions to go and get access to the resources in terms of direct query. That's one of the reasons. And then what is the authentication model, right? Where from the end user coming in, We don't currently pass that to the direct query sources other than like analysis services. Analysis services live connection, that's the one which we pass through. And that one also has to be like in tenant and domain settings, right? So those are the challenges. So right now, if you need an approach where you need to prepare dashboards for each of the users, then you need to pull the data into the Power BI, and then you're preparing the dashboard based on that. And that gets periodically refreshed once a day. The automatic frequency is like once a day, refresh it.
Okay, I think we need to go back and talk about this development
Yes.
versus production environment. We're an ISV, Microsoft Dynamics ISV, and we deliver a solution that embeds with Microsoft Dynamics GP. And we want to offer our client a collection of visuals that we develop on top of our data. We want to send them a PBIX or publish a PBIX for them to run in their server, their environment, from their Power BI. So that's our objective. My question is, when we develop all of these visuals, we might have 100 of them. If each individual one's developed locally using desktop and the local server, when I go to change that server name so that I can publish it to that client, his production server, is every single, is that one setting for that entire published collection, or does each individual visual have its own?
So if the visuals are part of the report, right? If it's a single report, and if it's part of the report, and if you're creating like a direct query connection directly to that SQL server, or even in the import case, depends on how many data sets you're actually getting the data from, right? If it's a single data set, then you change one single server name.
So it's all going to be for the data set, but there will be multiple reports.
If it's multiple reports, you likely need, if they're creating, when you say multiple reports, if these are multiple Power BI desktop files, multiple Power BI desktop files, is that what you're,
What we would deliver is one power. We deliver one PBIX file that contains all of our deliverables.
okay, so if it's one PBIX, then you would need to go and change the number of data sets wherever. If it's pointing to multiple servers, you need to go and change each of the connection strings which are there, which you're using within that PBIX.
Each of the, you talk about for every report in that PBIX, you have to go change the.
Not every report page, right? So you're creating, let's say that you're creating like 20 report pages, right? 20 report pages. All of these are referencing a data model from the Power BI desktop file. That data model which you've created is pointing to a set of sources, right? So it could be one, it could be a few of them, right? One or two, or if you're merging data, it's like 2 or 3. You need to go and change those data sources which you're pulling data from. It'll be one or few of them depending on your scenario. I can take a look in terms of like how you're preparing this, and then provide that guidance appropriately. Yes.
Could you repeat that? I can barely hear you. Yeah. Does it send an email, or does it silently fail? Does it send an email that it's failed?
No. So essentially, he scheduled it for 8 p.m. If I understand, sometimes it gets delayed in terms of like 15 minutes or half an hour, where the schedule, when it starts, right? So essentially, you're setting it up for 8 p.m. We will go and schedule the request as 8 p.m. Like depending on the load and number of refreshes that's going on, that will get picked up in one of the queues, and then that's why you see some delays in terms of when it's getting picked up. In terms of scheduling that, based on the architecture, I believe the scheduling happens, but when it gets picked up, based on a set of sources which you go and refresh.
But it's failing and not sending an email. That would be.
It's not failing.
It's just being delayed. Yeah. So it's. Okay, we'll have to look at.
So if it is not running, I would recommend. If it's not running, just file a support ticket so that it comes to our engineering team so that we can investigate this.
Sometimes it could we will ask you for the log files to save. Maybe it asked the gateway for a refresh. Like we'll have to understand what failed and where. So we'll take a look. Yep. The 8 times?
No, not the 8 times. Well, that too, but you could only do it on the hour or the half an hour.
Yes.
8 o'clock, 8:30. You can't send it to
Is there a reason?
in the schedule
Yep.
scheduling, right now we allocate like 8 o'clock or 8:30 or 9:30. We don't give a customization 8 or 5, right?
Yep.
So it's a rough guidance. Initially, we started in terms of we'll again make a request on ideas.powerbi.com. We'll definitely look into and consider it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And for the scheduled refresh, if you could send, this is our engineering team's, the hybrid BI email. So if you could send and just remind me of the issue and we'll take a look and solve it, hopefully. Yeah. Guess we're done.
Are you going to be able
Oh,
to
no,
use
okay.
calculated columns with directory anytime?
Calculating columns with direct query for,
Like if I put direct query in desktop, I can't make a calculate column, or did you already fix that?
So I don't recall on the top of my head in terms of direct query mode. I thought this was. I need to take a look. So just stop by and ask the expert. I'll just open up the desktop and I can
Yep.
check and confirm. Okay.